I didn't catch them in bed. I caught them in a coffin, in a photograph they thought would be buried forever. It happened on the day of my father-in-law's funeral. The air was heavy with the smell of lilies. The organ played its hollow notes, and people whispered prayers around the casket. But none of those sounds mattered, not when I saw my wife slip something into her father's hands before they closed the lid. At first, I thought it was just a sentimental gesture, a childhood picture, maybe a note. But something inside me told me not to let it go. After the ceremony, when the crowd began to drift toward their cars, I lingered. My chest ached with grief, but also with suspicion. I waited until no one was watching, then carefully retrieved the photograph. My hands trembled when I saw it. There was my wife, smiling, her arm wrapped around a man who wasn't me. A man I recognized instantly. Her so-called family friend. The same man who had just finished giving a tearful speech about loyalty and honor at the funeral. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. The picture was old, faded at the edges, but not old enough to be dismissed as some harmless memory. The date scribbled on the back froze my blood. It was from a night she claimed to be caring for her father at the hospital. A night when she swore she barely slept because she was holding his hand through the pain. Yet here she was, laughing, leaning into another man as though nothing else in the world existed. That I stared at that photograph until the paper nearly tore in my grip. My father-in-law had been the kind of man who believed in honesty above all things. He once told me, "Respect is the foundation of a home. Without it, walls collapse." And now, here I was, holding proof that the walls of my own home were already crumbling, that I slipped the photo into my pocket before anyone could notice. My wife's mother was weeping into a handkerchief nearby, her grief genuine, her body frail. I felt torn. Should I explode in rage right there, in front of everyone? Or should I keep this quiet? The answer came quickly. Funerals are for the dead. My war was with the living. At the reception afterward, I watched my wife closely. She played her role flawlessly, hugging relatives, arranging flowers, thanking guests for their condolences. Not a crack in her mask. The man from the photo, the so-called friend, stayed close to her side. Too close. He whispered something into her ear, and she laughed softly, touching his arm in a way that made my stomach twist. I wondered how many times they had done that while I was in the room, blind to the truth that I forced myself to smile and nod when people spoke to me. But inside, my mind was spinning. Questions stabbed at me like knives. How long had this been going on? Did her father know? Was that why she buried the photograph with him? Because he had been part of the secret? Or was it her way of hiding the evidence once and for all? By the time we drove home, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. That would be too easy for her, too dramatic, too emotional. She would cry, deny, twist the story, make me look like the paranoid husband. No, if I was going to take her down, I needed to be smarter than that. That night, as she slipped into bed beside me, pretending to be exhausted from the grief of the day, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My fingers brushed against the photograph hidden in my nightstand drawer. I memorized every detail. The way her head leaned against his shoulder, the curve of her smile, the smug confidence in his eyes. They thought the secret would rot away underground. But I had pulled it back into the light, and I wasn't going to stop until the whole world saw what I saw. Grief has a strange way of sharpening your memory. After the funeral, I found myself replaying the past year like an old film reel, frame by frame. Little things I had brushed aside, moments I dismissed as stress, grief, or coincidence, they all began to glow under a different light. There were the late-night phone calls. She'd whisper from the kitchen, her voice low, insisting it was the hospital checking in or her father's medication schedule. I never questioned it because I wanted to believe her. Once, I walked in unexpectedly, and she snapped her phone shut so quickly it nearly slipped from her hand. She smiled nervously and said, "Wrong number." Back then, I let it go. Now, it screamed louder than the organ at the funeral. There were the sudden trips to her parents' house. She'd pack an overnight bag, saying her father needed her comfort. I encouraged it. I admired her devotion. But what gnaws at me now is the detail. Every time she left, she wore her best perfume. Who puts on perfume to sit by a dying man's bedside? I should have asked that question sooner. Even at home, cracks showed. Her eyes no longer met mine at dinner. She sat with her phone face down on the table, screen lighting up every few minutes. When I asked, she brushed it off. Just updates from my cousin. But when I reached for her phone one evening, she clutched it to her chest as if it contained state secrets. That was the moment a seed of doubt planted itself in me. And then there was him, the so-called friend. He had always been around, hanging on the edges of family gatherings. I used to think it was kindness, that he was simply there to help an old man through his final days. But the truth is, he wasn't helping my father-in-law. He was circling my wife. I remember one night when I came home early from work. Their laughter echoed down the hallway before I even opened the door. When I stepped inside, the room went silent. She claimed he had dropped by to deliver groceries. He nodded, too quickly, avoiding my eyes. Something in my gut told me the groceries weren't the reason he was there. The cruelest detail was the smallest one, her scent. For years, she wore the same brand of shampoo, a simple fragrance I could recognize with my eyes closed. One night, after she came home late, I kissed her hair and froze. The smell was different. Subtle, but different. Like hugging a mannequin dressed to imitate her. A stranger wearing her skin. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. I felt like a detective too late to the crime scene, collecting fragments after the thieves had already fled. Still, those fragments told a story. My wife was building a life outside our marriage. Brick by brick, lie by lie. I lay awake that night, staring at the photograph again, my mind burning with every detail I had ignored. The calls, the perfume, the nervous laughs, the stolen glances. How had I been so blind? It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. They hadn't just deceived me. They had counted on me never noticing, but they made one mistake. They thought burying that photograph meant burying the truth. They underestimated me. And now, I wasn't just a grieving husband. I was a man sharpening his resolve, preparing for war. I couldn't shake the photograph from my mind. It felt like poison in my pocket, burning through every layer of trust one once had. But one picture wasn't enough. If I wanted the truth, I needed more than a single faded piece of paper. And the truth, I was certain, was hiding in places I hadn't dared to look before. A week after the funeral, I found myself back at my father-in-law's house. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, like it had been waiting for me. Dust still clung to the furniture. His slippers sat by the door, untouched. My wife thought I had gone to help her mother sort through legal papers, but that wasn't why I was there. I was hunting in the study. The drawers were cluttered with old tax forms, insurance documents, and yellowed letters. It looked like any ordinary office, until I noticed a thick envelope wedged between two binders. No label, no markings, just a date scribbled on the corner. My pulse quickened as I slid it open. Inside was a small stack of photographs. My throat tightened when I saw the first one. My wife and the same man from the coffin picture. Different clothes, different place, but the same closeness in their bodies, the same way she leaned toward him as if pulled by gravity. I dropped into the old armchair, staring at the images. The dates on the back lined up perfectly with the nights she'd sworn she was staying at the hospital. It was a pattern. This wasn't one mistake. This was a ritual. For a moment, rage blinded me. I imagined storming home, throwing the pictures on the table, demanding answers. But no, that would give her power. She'd cry, deny, twist the story, make me look insane. I'd seen her play that role too many times. I needed to be smarter. I dug deeper into the envelope. I found something else, receipts. Hotel stays, dinner reservations, all under her name, but with billing addresses I didn't recognize. One was even at a restaurant we had once celebrated our anniversary in. She had taken him to the same place she once swore was ours. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. I closed the envelope and tucked it into my jacket. My father-in-law had either known and hidden it, or stumbled onto the evidence and chosen silence. Maybe he couldn't face the shame of it while he was alive. I would never know. But I did know one thing. He hadn't buried it deep enough. That night at home, I studied my wife's face across the dinner table. She smiled, made small talk about groceries, the weather, her mother's health. To anyone else, she looked like a devoted daughter and wife. But all I could see was the shadow of the man from the photographs standing beside her, laughing at my blindness. I excused myself and locked the bedroom door. Carefully, I spread the photos across the bedspread, arranging them in order like evidence in a courtroom. The story they told was undeniable. My wife had betrayed me, betrayed her vows, and then tried to bury the evidence in her father's coffin. The hidden album was supposed to stay hidden forever, but now it belonged to me. And with it, I had a weapon far more powerful than rage. Proof. And proof, in the right hands, can destroy everything. The photographs were my silent witnesses. Each one screamed betrayal. But I knew if I confronted her too soon, she'd twist the truth into something I couldn't untangle. She had always been quick with words, quick with tears, quick with excuses. If I wanted to win this, I needed to let her believe I was still blind. I needed to play the fool. So I acted normal. I kissed her on the cheek in the mornings, made her coffee just the way she liked it, and asked about her mother's health like nothing had changed. I even smiled when she told me she might need to spend another night at her parents' house. On the surface, I was the same devoted husband. But inside, I was sharpening knives she couldn't see. My first trap was subtle. I mentioned, casually, that my lawyer had asked me to organize all our household files for future estate planning. I suggested we gather not just our documents, but also some of her father's records. She nodded, pretending to agree, but her eyes flickered. A flash of panic she tried to cover with a sip of water. Later that night, I sent an email to both my lawyer and her, and intentionally copied in the family friend. I phrased it as if he were helping with the legal paperwork. My wife pretended to be confused, asked why he was included. I shrugged. Didn't he handle some of your father's affairs? She forced a smile. Yes, I guess so. The next morning, I checked my inbox. There it was, a reply not meant for me. A short, hurried message from the friend to my wife. We need to be more careful. He's looking too closely. He must have hit reply all by mistake. My hands trembled as I read it, but my face stayed calm when I walked into the kitchen. That I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I slipped in another trap. At dinner, I told her my boss wanted me to travel out of town for a few days. I wasn't going anywhere, of course. I just wanted to see what she would do when she thought the house was empty. She smiled too brightly, told me to be safe. I kissed her goodnight, then later parked my car 2 blocks away and watched the house from the shadows. 9:15 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. His car, the family friend. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest as I watched him step inside. The lights flickered on in the living room, then the kitchen. Silhouettes moved behind the curtains. They thought I was miles away. I clenched my fists, every muscle screaming to storm in and drag them both into the open. But I forced myself to wait. Rage would ruin everything. I needed them to write their own confession with their actions. I needed undeniable proof. After an hour, his car pulled away. I slipped back inside quietly. My wife was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. Her breathing was too steady, too rehearsed. I stared at her for a long time, wondering if she could feel my eyes burning through the dark. She thought I was still the fool. She thought the lies were safe, but with every trap, every mistake they made, I was closing the circle tighter around them. And soon, there would be no escape. The night I watched his car leave my driveway, something inside me shifted. Until then, I had only suspicions, photographs, and half-broken alibis. But now I knew. The evidence wasn't just out there in envelopes or hidden albums. It was inside my house, under my own roof, tucked into corners I hadn't checked. So I started searching. Not in a rage, but with precision. Rage leaves fingerprints. Patience leaves none. Her laptop was my first stop. She guarded it like treasure, always closing the lid when I entered the room. One afternoon, when she went to the store, I opened it. Password protected. I wasn't surprised. But what she didn't know was that my father-in-law had once shared his list of passwords with me, asking me to keep them safe in case he forgot. I tried his usual pattern. On the third attempt, I was in.at first. Everything looked ordinary. Emails, spreadsheets, the usual family photos. But tucked inside a folder labeled Stairs to Basement, I found something that stopped my breath. Video files. Small clips, each with a date. I clicked the first one. The angle was low, grainy, like footage from an old security camera. It showed my living room. And then, her. My wife. She walked in with the friend, both of them glancing nervously at the camera before sitting close together on the couch. They weren't careless, but they weren't innocent either. His hand lingered too long on hers. She leaned in too close. Nothing explicit, but enough to tell me the truth. I clicked another clip. Different date. Same pattern. The more I watched, the more I realized this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a timeline of betrayal captured in my own house that I forced myself to stop. My stomach churned, my fists shook, but I knew I couldn't let anger control me. These files weren't just pain. They were ammunition. Digging deeper, I found documents, receipts for home repairs, invoices for cleaning services that never happened, all routed through the same email chain with the friend. They had used my house as their stage and thought they could cover their tracks with paper lies that I copied everything. Photos, videos, receipts, onto a hidden drive. Then I wiped my fingerprints clean, closed the laptop, and set it exactly where I had found it. When she came home later, carrying groceries, she smiled at me like nothing had happened. I smiled back, my secret drive burning like a weapon in my pocket. That night, lying beside her, I listened to her steady breathing. She looked peaceful, as though the world believed her act. But I knew better. Every file, every image, every receipt was a brick in the wall I was building around her. She thought she was safe inside our home. But our home had already betrayed her. The hidden videos had been a blade through my chest. But money, that was the trail that could cut even deeper. People can bury photographs, delete files, pretend away late-night whispers. But money leaves footprints. And those footprints never lie. I started small, reviewing our joint bank account. At first glance, everything seemed normal: groceries, utilities, gas. But then I noticed the patterns. Withdrawals in round numbers. Always before the nights she claimed. She was staying with her father. Payments to unfamiliar companies with vague names like Care Solutions and Wellness Support. The invoices matched the dates of those so-called hospital vigils that I printed the statements and highlighted the transactions. My pen scratched angrily across the page, circling amounts that could have paid for a month's rent, gone in a single night. My wife had always said we were tight on money. That's why vacations were postponed, why the car repairs had to wait. Yet here she was, bleeding our savings dry, while smiling at me across the dinner table. Digging deeper, I requested the estate's preliminary financial records from my father-in-law's attorney. He handed me a neat folder with receipts for medical care, prescriptions, and hospice costs. But buried inside were duplicates, 2 sets of bills for the same treatments, one authentic, one false. The false ones had been paid from our joint account that I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was using me, my work, my income, my name, to finance her secret life with him. Every dollar was another betrayal stamped with my signature that I called a friend of mine, a retired accountant. We sat together late into the night, the kitchen table covered in papers. He adjusted his glasses, tapped his pen against the numbers, and finally said, "These aren't mistakes. This is deliberate. Someone's running 2 books." It was her, my wife, the woman who once promised for better or worse. She had turned our marriage into a bank she could plunder. I thanked him, tucked the papers back into the folder, and walked him out. As soon as the door shut, I leaned against it, struggling to breathe. The anger was heavy, but beneath it was something colder: clarity. Now I had proof not only of infidelity, but of fraud. Something no lawyer, no judge, no jury could ignore. Later that evening, I watched her move around the kitchen. She hummed a tune while stirring soup, as though she weren't secretly dismantling my life piece by piece. I wanted to slam the folder onto the counter, force her to read every line, every theft. But instead, I smiled, kissed her cheek, and said dinner smelled wonderful. Inside, though, I was already drawing the lines of her downfall. The photographs and videos were emotional proof. But the money, cold, hard, undeniable, was the weapon I would use to end this war. And soon, she would realize she hadn't just betrayed a husband. She had betrayed a man who knew exactly how to turn her lies into her prison. By the time I uncovered the financial trail, I knew I had enough to ruin her. The photographs, the videos, the receipts, they were a noose tightening around her neck. But part of me still wondered, would she confess if I gave her the chance? Could she salvage even a shred of dignity before I destroyed everything? So one evening, I sat her down at the kitchen table. The same table where we had shared meals, laughed, planned our future. Now it felt like a stage for the final act. "I want to talk," I began, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Not to fight, not to accuse, just talk." She looked up from her phone, feigning innocence. About what? About us, I said. About the late nights. The trips. The money. For the first time, I saw her mask flicker. A shadow crossed her face, but only for a second. Then she laughed. Not nervously. Not guiltily. She laughed like I had told her a joke. You really think you're some kind of detective? She said, her tone dripping with mockery. You're paranoid. You're imagining things. I leaned forward. I'm giving you one chance. Step away from this. Tell me the truth, and I'll walk with you through it. But if you keep lying, I paused, letting the silence weigh heavy between us. Then I promise you, the truth will destroy you. Her eyes narrowed. Then she leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and smirked. Destroy me? Please. No one would ever believe you. You're weak. You're bitter. And when people hear your story, they'll see a jealous husband trying to smear his wife while she cared for her dying father. The words hit like acid, burning straight through me. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was confident, arrogant. She thought she held all the cards that I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, recorded from a conversation just days earlier. Her laughter with him. Her words, he has no idea. He's so easy to fool. Her face went pale. For the first time, her smile faltered. You recorded me. She stammered that I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I told you. One chance. This was it. For a moment, she seemed ready to argue, to spin another lie. But instead, she stood up, grabbed her phone, and stormed out of the room. The slam of the bedroom door echoed like a gavel in a courtroom that I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. That was the moment something inside me turned to stone. The part of me that still wanted to save her, to save us, was gone. She thought my words were empty threats. She thought I had no power, but she had just handed me the final piece I needed, her arrogance, and arrogance, combined with proof, is the perfect recipe for downfall. After her laughter at the kitchen table, something in me hardened beyond repair. She had mocked me, underestimated me, and believed that no one would ever believe my side of the story. That was her fatal mistake. I didn't need arguments. I didn't need her confession. I had something stronger, evidence, and evidence doesn't shout. It whispers, quietly, coldly, in the right hands. It speaks louder than any scream. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I scanned the photographs, organized the financial records, clipped the video files into neat, undeniable sequences. No commentary, no rage, just facts lined up like bullets in a magazine. Then, one by one, I sent them. The first envelope went to her father's attorney. Inside, the hidden photographs, the receipts showing money siphoned from the estate, the forged invoices. I included no letter, no explanation. The evidence spoke for itself. The second went to the accountant who had flagged the irregularities. I knew he would understand the numbers better than anyone. His professional eye would catch every deliberate manipulation. The third package was the most personal. I addressed it to the friend's wife. She had stood at the funeral too, her eyes red with grief, never suspecting that while she mourned, her husband's arm was around another woman. When she opened that package, her world would fracture just as mine had. Finally, I sent a copy to the hospice coordinator, the one who had managed the schedules and knew exactly when my father-in-law was under care. She would see that the dates didn't match, that my wife hadn't been sitting by her father's side at all those nights. She had been somewhere else, with someone else. When I sealed the last envelope, I felt no triumph, only calm. The kind of calm you feel before a storm, when the air is heavy and the sky waits to break. That evening, my wife laughed over dinner again, telling me a story about a neighbor. She had no idea that while she smiled, her world was already collapsing behind her. She had no idea that 4 sets of eyes now held the proof of her betrayal. That I excused myself early, went to the garage, and sat in the car with the engine off. My phone buzzed, an email notification. I opened it. The attorney's assistant had written back, "We need to schedule a meeting immediately." I leaned back in the driver's seat, closed my eyes, and let the silence wrap around me. For months, she had lived in shadows, convinced she controlled the story, but now the shadows belonged to me. And soon, when the light hit, there would be nowhere left for her to hide. The morning of the will reading felt heavier than the funeral itself. The house was packed with relatives, legal assistants, and old friends of my father-in-law. The air buzzed with the weight of inheritance, money, property, family honor. But for me, it wasn't about any of that. It was about the moment the mask would finally crack. My wife walked in wearing black, her face composed, her chin high. She carried herself like a queen stepping into her throne room. The family friend was there too, hovering close, his hand brushing hers when he thought no one noticed. But I noticed, and so did the attorney, who glanced at me with the briefest nod. He knew what was coming that we all sat. Papers shuffled, voices hushed. Then the attorney cleared his throat and began that he read through the formalities. Debts settled, small gifts to charities, tokens for distant relatives. My wife sat with a faint smile, already envisioning herself as the new keeper of her father's estate. She thought this was her victory lap, until the attorney stopped, adjusted his glasses, and opened a separate folder. Before his passing, he said, "Your father prepared a final statement, dated, signed, and witnessed." He unfolded a letter and began to read. The words were simple, but each one cut deeper than any blade. Respect is the foundation of a home. Without it, walls collapse. If respect is violated, I cannot, in good conscience, entrust my legacy to those who betrayed it. A murmur spread across the room. My wife stiffened. The friend shifted in his seat, color rising in his face. The attorney continued, laying out the adjustments. My wife was to be removed as primary executor of the estate. Control would pass instead to a neutral trustee until matters could be resolved. The reasoning? Evidence of misconduct and conflict of interest. She shot up from her chair, her voice trembling with fury. "This is a lie. He would never." But before she could finish, the attorney placed a stack of photographs and documents on the table. The same ones I had sent days earlier. Her father's words. My evidence. Together, they formed an unbreakable chain. Her face drained of color. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. For once, she had no story to spin, no mask to hide behind. The friend slammed his hand on the table. "This is nonsense," he barked, his voice cracking. But his wife, sitting in the back, stood with tears streaming down her face. She held up the envelope I had sent her. "Is it nonsense?" she whispered. "If I have the same proof?" The room erupted. Voices rose, chairs scraped, the fragile fabric of their lies tearing apart in front of everyone. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just sat, calm, watching the empire of deception crumble piece by piece. By the time the attorney regained order, the outcome was sealed. My wife had lost her father's trust, her family's respect, and the control she thought she owned. The friend had lost his marriage in the same breath, and I had lost my illusions. But I had gained something far more valuable: justice. When the storm finally broke, the silence that followed felt almost foreign. The house was quieter than it had ever been. No whispers on the phone, no staged smiles at dinner, no perfume clinging to the air when she claimed she'd been sitting at her father's bedside. She packed her things quickly after the reading of the will. There were no tears this time, no excuses, no desperate pleas. She left with her head down, her world in ruins, her carefully spun story unraveled in front of everyone who once believed her. The family friend didn't stay long in the picture either. His wife filed for separation within days of receiving the envelope. The last I heard, he moved out of state, carrying his shame with him like a second shadow. The estate was placed in the hands of a trustee. My father-in-law's legacy, his home, his savings, his hard work, would not be controlled by the daughter who betrayed him. Instead, it would be handled with the respect he had always demanded. And me? I didn't come out of this untouched. Betrayal leaves scars no one can see. Nights are still restless. Sometimes I still reach for the photograph in my drawer, the one that started it all, and wonder if I could have done something sooner. But then I remind myself, I didn't lose. I didn't bend. I fought back, and I made the truth louder than their lies. I rebuilt slowly. I fixed the porch my father-in-law never finished. I started jogging again in the mornings, breathing in the cold air, reminding myself that each step forward was mine alone. My life isn't perfect now, but it's mine. Honest, free, and in that freedom, I found something she could never take away. Peace. That if you've been with me through this story, thank you. These moments are real, raw, and sometimes painful to share. But they matter because the truth always matters. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Hit like if this one kept you on edge. And tell me in the comments, did I do the right thing? What would you have done in my place?